And I'll have to say that after 10 years of teaching students in higher education, uh, if I had to boil it all down to two words of advice, it would be student agency. We need to give up this role of teacher and establish ourselves as the lead co-learner and show, expose the fact that we're learning too. I think the more that people feel in the community that they have ownership of that community, the richer the interaction will be.
The culture is something that really matters to me, and that sets the boundary, right? That sets the tone, that sets how whether people feel safe or not. We've actually developed a set of values to ground our culture in, and you will like to hear that we used one of the primary Burning Man values, radical inclusion, as our first value in the list. Our students come from 30 different countries all across Europe and beyond, are between 18 and 57 years old. So, you really experience that diversity and, frankly, all the difficulties that come with it. I think the fact that everybody needs to speak English, which is almost nobody's first language, really helps to open the minds. Hello, this is Max, and today I'm with Howard Rheingold. Hi, Howard.
Hello.
This is another episode of 42X where we invite thinkers and partners and cool people from around the world to think about what it takes to develop next generation education, next generation software engineering, and next generation automotive slash mobility slash the next thing, whatever. And well, obviously, I'm super happy that this works out because Howard and I don't get to see each other that often these days. But go back to the times when I was in Stanford in 2008, and I just wrote him an email and said, "Hey, Howard, I'm Max. I'd love to talk with you about e-learning and online collaboration." And we started to work on several courses on how to use social media and what this internet means for knowledge transfers. And yeah, how do you remember these days? It's more than 10 years ago, is it?
Well, I was just beginning to teach at Berkeley and Stanford. And in fact, you attended some of my classes, first classes at Berkeley. And what I remember is us sitting under the plum tree in my garden, and you really pushing me to give the students more agency. And I'll have to say that after 10 years of teaching students in higher education, uh, if I had to boil it all down to two words of advice, it would be student agency. And I wish I knew at the beginning what I had learned from the end, which is that we need to give up this role of teacher and establish ourselves as the lead co-learner and show, expose the fact that we're learning too, and give the more agency you give students, the more interested they are in learning. And that's something that teachers in educational institutions are afraid of. And first of all, I think it's just natural. I experience it's a fear of exposing that you don't know everything, and you're supposed to. They're paying good money to learn from
You're giving up control. I mean, for a good reason. You want to be in control when you're in front of many people and when you're paid to do something. And interestingly, that is something that we all feel unsecure about, and you don't want to show that insecurity. I mean, it was something that is deeply ingrained in this 42 pedagogical model to focus purely on peer learning. As we don't have professors, we don't have classes at all, and frankly, it's still a bit of an amazement to me, and I think to many of the students as well, that it is working. so well. And I hope that we will, evolve the what we're doing over time. And as you know, and I would love to dig a bit deeper with you on the culture. The culture is something that really matters to me, and that sets the boundary, right? That sets the tone, that sets how whether people feel safe or not. My friend and CEO of 42 Heilbronn has recently written something quite nice. He said, culture is the bridge between people and is what makes a place special. And for these reasons, we've actually developed a set of values to ground our culture in. And you will like to hear that we used one of the primary Burning Man values, radical inclusion, as our first value in the list. Our students come from 30 different countries all across Europe and beyond. Are between 18 and 57 years old. So, you really experience that diversity and, frankly, all the difficulties that come with it. I think the fact that everybody needs to speak English, which is almost nobody's first language, really helps to open the minds to have these conversations. But no surprise, this is a human endeavor. We have all the cases of harassment, of abuse of freedom of speech, of um, uh, yeah, trouble in the community. And I would love to hear from your experience. What are the important tenets of creating a vibrant and inclusive learning culture?
Well, I've become convinced that the chief obstacle to learning in educational institutions is grading. Grading as we know it. Grades, I would go so far as to say that grades are evil if you regard education as a way of enabling people to learn their way in the world. It's really in the way of that. So there's a movement called ungrading that you should check out.
I don't know that. Very cool. Thanks for the tip.
In regard to peer learning, 10 years ago, I started this pedagogy community, and they're still growing. I say they because I kind of dropped out of it, dropped back from it. But the community, there are people all over the world, they're educators all over the world, and they're making, I think, the fourth edition of the pedagogy handbook at pedagogy.org. So we, firmly believe that the resources that are available to just about anybody who has access to the internet, plus the know-how of how does a group learn something, it gives us an opportunity that we've never had before educationally. That you really had to go to a school to learn. Before, the schools had a monopoly on education. Now, with peer learning, groups of people can learn together. I think it's important for people to regard it as a safe place. That in many communities, not just education communities, the moderators face the issue of people who are disruptive. There are um, trolls. There's something called sea lioning, which is just people asking questions to not to get answers, but to monopolize attention. And I believe that there should be a simple set of behavioral rules that people agree to before they join. And by simple, I mean, treat other people with respect. It can be as simple as that. Of course, people will want to litigate that. So you need to have a clear understanding of who's going to do the judging if there's a problem. And people should be given a second chance, and you should use a back channel to try to communicate with people. Sometimes the strongest attention seekers can turn into really good learners. But I think that if you try your best and there's still a problem, you should suspend them or expel them. Then there will be people saying that this is censorship and it's an intrusion on freedom of speech, but actually, they're behavior is an intrusion on the freedom of speech of others. That for every person you lose because they feel that you are overly censorious, there will be 10 or 100 people who will begin to speak up because they were afraid to speak up before. So, rule number one is make it a safe space. And in my experience with online communities, the I don't really prefer the term moderator. I prefer host or facilitator. You know, more like a host at a party or a facilitator in a meeting. That they come from inside the community. That some people show up. You don't know who they are before they show up, and they start helping. And the people who are enthusiastic helpers promote them to be facilitators. I think the more that people feel in the community that they have ownership of that community, the richer the interaction will be.
Super interesting, and as you won't be too surprised, we've been discussing this, and we're trying to implement a good number of the elements that you said. But as I'm sure you also agree, these problems are hard, right? So we agreed on a three strikes out model, where there is an infringement. It wasn't that big, and it wasn't intentional. You get a warning. You do something that we clearly don't want, but you didn't do it intentionally, you get a strike. You do something on purpose, and we consider this harsh enough, you're out. Luckily, we didn't have to use that last measure, but there are two strikes that we've had to deal out, where I've written a piece about our community values and the governance around it. And one of the fascinating things is that not the time and the experience that you have, but I've been around this space for a long time. But this is really from a green field, right? There's absolutely nothing. And I'm actually in charge together with a team on creating it. And it's so fascinating to see what you described, that we always encourage the introverts to come out in big meetings to ask questions. We kind of use the back channel to tell the extroverts, the 2 3 people that always speak, to leave some space, and it's working. And in the feedback that we get from the students, mostly right now from these 4 week long boot camps, in the end they're saying, I have never experienced a positive um, uh, collaborative, cooperative community like that. And it is as simple as to change the incentive structure, as you suggested. There's no grades, and even more importantly, I think we call out that in order to be selected to become a student at 42, you need the support from your peers. So every week they're voting a number of people who they say, this was a great peer, she or he helped me in learning more, right? And so everybody is trying to get those votes, and that creates a positive spiral. And I'm really optimistic that this might be something that can be used far beyond what we're doing here in 42, far beyond programming, and is a positive experience. But yeah, I would love to be able to call on you every once in a while to hear what you're thinking, because this governance problem is, on the one hand, you need to decide which parts are really for the host, right? Like when it comes to the actual building, when it comes to the infrastructure, I think we need to take responsibility, and we cannot completely open that up. But on the other, on pretty much all other spectrums, I tell the students, let the inmates run the asylum. This is your school. Do whatever you think is right, and set up the right infrastructure. But so we're now opening student council elections, and it's not straightforward, right? I mean, are we supposed to? I mean, maybe we shouldn't even tell them, maybe you want to vote on a student council. Now, my suggestion would be, set up an election committee, and then you decide how you vote, what mechanisms you use, what timing, etc. But any thoughts on how to allow the community self-governance, self-organization?
Well, back to student agency. Um, that's kind of an abstract concept. In practice, I think it involves making sure that everything you do, that there are volunteers from the community who are participating. I would use example in the online courses that I taught when we had a video conference with a chat. We set up a screen where people would propose roles and take those roles so that when I was talking or when another student was presenting, we would have a team of 2 or 3 people who would be searchers, who would search for good resources connected to what was being said. There would be another team of people who would, and they would put the URLs that they found in the chat. And another team would collect those URLs and they would give it 2 or 3 sentences of context, the way you would in a blog, explain why you might want to click on that. We had um, a, and this was a great group exercise. We had a lexicon. So there was a lexicon team who would uh, record on a wiki words and phrases from the texts, from the lectures, from our conversations. And then during the week between our video conferences, it was up to all of us to kind of Wikipedia style define those terms. So at the end of the course, we had this pretty big lexicon that we had all participated in. And of course, one of the aspects of a wiki is that you can go and see the revision history. So at the beginning of each session, we would look at the revision history and see who um, contributed to it. Then there would be another team who would make a mind map. Um, and finally, there would be someone who would take these contextualized links, they would take the mind map, they would take the chat, and they would make a web page out of it, a wiki page out of it for the class. So every time we had a video conference, there would be 8 to 12 people, different people each time, who had a role in that. So I think having, and also inviting people to teach. Uh, you might remember in my college classes, I had co-teaching teams. There's I think 2 benefits to that. One of them is that um, again, it's the learners learning together. And what I said to the co-teaching team was, you don't have to cover everything in the syllabus. What do you think is the most important and engaging thing to get across to the other learners? And so that forced them to try to focus on that and to try to get it across, but also uh, not only gave them a sense of agency, they understood a little bit what it's like to try to be in the role of teacher. So if everybody circulates through that, then that idea of co-learner gets built into the culture. And once you model that behavior, the culture really takes care of it. People will enforce their own norms. They will onboard people to the culture themselves.
That sounds really, really cool. And I actually to take a bunch of notes. I love the different roles that people can have. One quick follow-up question. You created a new wiki though every time you taught the class, right? Because one of the things that the 42 elders, the pedagogy lead in Paris, said is they don't want the students to be able to find things too quickly. They want them to engage in the searching and in the foraging of finding and collecting the information. And they were worried that if we had a wiki style knowledge base on site, that the learning wouldn't happen as much anymore.
Well, every course was self-contained. Remember the social media classroom. So we had this, self-contained medium in which you had to log into it, and it had the forum, the chat, the blogs, and the wikis in there. So each class cohort created their own. And then we, even with the same course, with a new cohort, we would start from scratch. The access to the lexicon is not as important as creating the lexicon.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. So, Howard, I had mentioned we're inspired by your friends from the Long Now Foundation and their manual for civilization. So we're trying to compile the ultimate collection of books and other resources that happy software engineers should read. What would be your, let's say, two book recommendations where you say this is what everybody in this trade should read and think about?
Well, they already probably know about the mythical man month. So,
No, I don't think
okay, the
so.
mythical man month by Fred Brooks. Um, Fred Brooks led the team that created the IBM 360 software. And the Mythical Man Month essentially is if you are falling behind on a project and you double the number of engineers on it, then you essentially are going to quadruple the amount of time that it takes to get it done. So that's more technical, but I think more of an overview. What about Ivan Illich and tools for conviviality? I think get out of the software world and think about tools a little bit. Joseph Weizenbaum, uh, Computer Power and Human Reason is a really
Really nice one. Obviously, an ex-Berliner who had an Internet and Society Research Institute named after him recently. So, yes, really nice one. We definitely take that one up. And
uh,
maybe one more recent find that you discovered.
well. I just I read this is completely orthogonal to it, but I read a really interesting book called it's by Joe Henrich, Henrich, and it's called The Secret of Our Success. And you remember in 2005, I gave this TED talk about why isn't there a interdisciplinary study of human cooperation? And
Yeah.
this book really is that. It
No
brings it
way.
together. And one of the interesting things is that we're not the only species that does social learning, but we're the only species that teaches. So um, it really talks about the handoff from biological evolution to cultural evolution. Biological evolution takes a very long time for uh, mutations to match against the environment and for the beneficial ones to spread. But once somebody learns a new way to dig a hole, um, all you have to do is teach someone else and it spreads instantly through the society. And not only that, the next generation knows how to dig a hole and they may know how to plant something. And so it becomes additive very, very quickly. So understanding, I think, how culture works uh, ought to be important. Then there's I think maybe the Eleanor Ostrom's book Governing the Commons is a little bit too technical, but
No, I think it's super deep and should be in our library. Thank
yeah,
you for bringing it
because
up.
your seven design principles, I think, are really important for people who are creating common resources. To
Right, and the polycentricity, I think, is an aspect so that it's very rarely happening just on one level, and it's more than one center that is influencing how things are happening. I think once people, use these constructs in how they look at the world, it really helps to be less frustrated and ideally to be more effective and develop things in the way that you want.
you would think
Cool. Well,
you would think that any programmer would know Doug Engelbart's Augmenting Human Intellect, but I find that a lot of them don't because it's so old. So I would require them to read that at least.
yeah, really, really awesome. And as expected, Howard, you more than doubled the expectations. And thank you so much. This is really cool. Great to see you again. Big, big hug to Judy, Mamie, Taiwan, and the new little one, Catherine. I'm so proud of all of you hanging in there, and frankly, keeping the good vibes in the Silicon Valley alive. And
Yeah,
now in the third generation,
yeah,
a big love and big hug over
yeah.
to you guys. Hope to travel and see you again soon.
Okay. Auf Wiedersehen. Till we meet again. Au revoir. Hasta la vista.